Hey guys, welcome back to Intelligent Faith 315. This is Pastor Jay. Run the website here. It's glad to have you with us. Just want to encourage you, if you are watching these videos perhaps on our YouTube channel, you can swing over to intelligentfaith315.com and you can check out all the other videos and articles and so forth that we have posted over there. We're going to be continuing today with the series that we begun some time ago, Good Arguments for God's Existence. If you remember last time we were together, we discussed what's known as the cosmological argument from contingency. So we're going through the series, different arguments for God's existence. We're camping out on a couple of different versions of the cosmological argument. We'll probably move to the moral argument next, and the design argument, and then some other ones like maybe the ontological argument, the conceptual argument for God's existence, argument from consciousness, and so forth. So there's numerous versions of the cosmological argument. The first one that we covered, and we just finished it up last time, so if you didn't catch it, if you're interested, do encourage you to go to intelligentfaith315.com, or if you're on our YouTube channel, just scroll down, and it's called the cosmological argument from contingency, popularized by Gottfried Wilhelm Leibniz, the German mathematician and philosopher in the 1700s. So we did that in about 3 or 4 installments, and the last one, which was kind of a longer video, but it's kind of a full summary of everything that we covered. You could check that video out. It could bring you up to speed. So that was the first cosmological argument that we spoke about. And cosmological argument, again, is just speaking of the fact that we look to the universe and things that we observe about the universe and then reason our way from those universal principles using a deductive argument back to the existence of a personal creator God. And so if you don't believe that type of thing is possible, do really encourage you to check it out. But this is the benefit of what's called natural theology, Christian philosophy, and just uses simple logic, some good philosophy, and it really is pretty logically airtight. These are good arguments, and they do take us back to the existence of God. And actually, as we'll see as we put them all together, we're not going to be looking at or the goal is not to really isolate these arguments and look at them individually, but rather to put them together. And as you combine the conclusions of the cosmological arguments, the different versions of that, the moral argument, the design argument, the conceptual argument, what you come up with is an amazing description that basically parallels the description of the Creator God that we see in the Old and New Testament, and only in the Old and New Testament. All the other worldviews and the ideas or concepts of God fall off the table. They not only go against the revelation of Scripture, but they go against reason, which we all share in common. So that's the benefit of natural theology, is that even if a person, and perhaps yourself, doesn't really like the Bible, believe in the Bible, that's totally fine. That's okay. We can talk about these types of topics using just plain reason and logic and philosophy without even really appealing to Scripture. So we covered the cosmological argument from contingency last time. Today we're going to be starting a new cosmological argument in the series, and this is the cosmological argument oftentimes referred to as Kalam. A modern-day defender of this argument that's probably the most well-known defender of it, a man that I study under and a man that I read a lot of his material, is Dr. William Lane Craig from Biola University. He's a research professor there, Talbot School of Theology, PhD, great man, arguably one of the most capable defenders of the Christian faith today. So Dr. William Lane Craig, he's popularized this version of the cosmological argument in numerous books, and he uses it almost in every single debate that he does. So if you do want to learn more about it from Dr. Craig, which I would encourage you to do so, he's a much more proficient speaker and much more able mind than myself. I'm still studying for my master's here, and Dr. William Lane Craig is well beyond his PhD, of course. So his website is reasonablefaith.org, reasonablefaith.org. We do publish things from Dr. Craig from time to time. We've got some of his videos on our YouTube channel, but I encourage you to check out his complete presentation of the cosmological argument, Kalam, on his website. So the reason this cosmological argument is called Kalam is it basically is a throwback to medieval Islamic philosophy from the 1100s. This cosmological argument, it bases itself off of arguing for a first cause of the universe. If you remember Leibniz's cosmological argument, that German mathematician philosopher, he was basically arguing for the necessary being that's the ground and foundation of all other contingent beings and actually the contingent universe itself. So Leibniz's argument was for a sufficient explanation, a sufficient reason for why there's anything rather than nothing, why there are all these contingent beings that we see in the universe. The Kalam cosmological argument, however, it argues for a first cause of the universe. So as I said, Kalam is basically, it's an Arabic word, and it's basically used in Arabic medieval theology much in the same way that Christians call the Bible the Word of God or the Scriptures or the law. This word kalam in Arabic basically means the same type of thing. The reason why a lot of folks call it kalam is because it was popularized with an Islamic theologian, Al-Ghazali. He wasn't the one that came up with it. It's seen extensive use in the Roman Catholic Church, Latin Church Fathers like St. Bonaventure, Islamic theologians. It's really been used across the board, even by Jewish theologians and philosophers, because the one thing, of course, that Judaism, Islam, and Christianity all share in common is we all believe in a personal creator God. So to that extent, it's enjoyed broad usage across these religious boundary lines and so forth. And also, if you learn this argument, this might be a good conversation tool, not just to witness to people in general or to share your faith in an intelligent way with, say, a skeptic or an atheist, but especially with a Muslim, especially with a follower of Islam, because they would probably respect the fact that you know this argument and that you have a reasonable faith, an intelligent faith to begin with, but also that they would probably find some point of identification with you if you can talk to them in this way. So that's really why it's called the Kalam cosmological argument. It harkens back to Islamic medieval theology, Al-Ghazali, 1100s. This is a very, very short, I think kind of a simple argument in that sense. Not that it's not challenging in some areas or whatever, but it just seems so crisp and so short, so direct, so to the point. So you could kind of think of it as a super cosmological argument, or you might say a super argument for God's existence. Maybe that's why I'm wearing the shirt that I'm wearing, or maybe I just came up with that to excuse the shirt that I'm wearing. But this is a fantastic argument for God's existence. I really do encourage you as we go through this to write the premises down, to write the steps of the argument down, the premises and then the conclusion, and really just carry it around on a piece of paper. A business card, write it, inside maybe your Bible or your college textbook, or you could even write it on your hand for all that we know. But it's very short, and the benefit of that is you can always have it with you. After a while, of course, it'll be memorized, and this is just a great conversation piece. It's a really good intellectual tool to just provoke people to start thinking about these issues, and if this argument is correct, and if there are no logical mistakes within this argument, if the premises are true, then I just want to remind you that the conclusion follows logically and inescapably. So just remember that's really, I think, the intellectual force behind these arguments is that if they really are true, there's really no escaping it. Of course, you can't always escape it. You can't always find an intellectual escape hatch or escape route by simply denying one of the premises. But if it's a premise that's proven true by good philosophy, good science, and common experience, and if you still want to deny that, well, you could, but it's going to come with a high intellectual price tag. In other words, you're going to look pretty silly doing it. So, of course, the goal here is to not win an argument or to try to be superior in our thinking or anything like that. Especially if you're watching this video, if you are a subscriber to our YouTube channel, or if you are checking into Intelligent Faith 315, let me just ask you a question. Are you sincerely seeking after truth? Are you genuinely, personally interested in discovering the truth about reality, about existence, about your own personal life? That really is one of the fundamental questions that needs to be asked, because if the answer is no, if you're not really concerned with looking for answers, if you've already have your mind made up, if you're never going to budge, you've already made a determination of the will that you're never going to switch in your position of atheism, skepticism, agnosticism, what have you, and you're just simply touring the intellectual landscape and just looking around to see what's out there, well, this isn't going to help you really at all. It may actually maybe even be bad for you. But if you are a person who, of course you hold an opinion, of course you hold a philosophy, a worldview, we all do, but if you are open to seeking after truth, and perhaps if you discover something that may be contrary to what you previously believed, would you be willing to allow that viewpoint to be overturned? Would you be willing to alter your view of reality if you discovered perhaps that your view of certain things didn't quite match up after all with the way things really are? You need to ask yourself that question. That really is the dominant question in discussing these issues of truth and of reality, philosophy, of religion, whatever you want to call it, that are you a sincere seeker after truth? Do you want to know reality truly, or are you just perhaps have some other motive or entertaining yourself in looking at all these different things? If you are a person that really does want to know the truth about reality, and I'm not saying you don't, maybe you know and I don't, but if you are a sincere seeker of truth, and if you are genuinely concerned with discovering and making sure that your ideas about reality and the world and the universe are correct, then I welcome you and I encourage you to really sink your teeth, intellectually speaking, into this argument, into the argument from contingency, into all the other arguments that we're going to be covering, because they have a lot of intellectual force behind them. And I don't care what religion you are, I don't care where you live, what your culture is, your age, we should all be concerned about knowing reality as it really is. We should all be concerned tremendously about discovering what the truth is about this existence that we all share in, or at least it appears that we share in it together. We should all be concerned about that. And if that be the case, then let's talk with each other, let's dialogue. If any of you would like to maybe post a video somewhere and send it to me, I can then create a video response for you. I'd love to have a conversation with you. I have a friend, a comrade of mine, Dan Mill23. I believe he's an atheist buddy of mine down in Australia. Dan, if you're listening to this, we can get our video conversation going again, or any of you out there in China, Ukraine, Germany, France. We have viewers all over the world, a small group, but we have viewers from Russia, from Bosnia, Herzegovina, of course from America, Puerto Rico. Any of you are welcome to send me a video, fill it up with some questions, maybe 5 to 10 questions, and I'll make a video for you answering it. But the point is, I want to engage people, and we are here to engage folks that are sincerely concerned with seeking after the truth, seeking after the true fundamental nature of reality. And this, of course, is the benefit of philosophy, and believe it or not, of theology as well. Philosophy is a servant to good, solid theology, but just thinking about reality in general. So, this is a very short argument, cosmological argument called Kalam, argues for a first cause of the universe, or argues back to a first cause of the universe. It has 2 premises and 1 conclusion. So here it is. Premise number 1. Everything that begins to exist has a cause. Premise number 2. The universe began to exist. Therefore, the universe has a cause. Let me say that again. Premise number 1. Everything that begins to exist has a cause. Premise number 2. The universe began to exist. Therefore, it follows logically and inescapably that the universe itself has a cause. Now, that's a deductive argument. It starts off with the universal and goes down to the particular. But if there's no logical mistakes in this argument, if there's no incorrect, incoherent, illogical statements, if the 2 premises are airtight, if they're true, then that conclusion follows logically and inescapably, and then you as the viewer are going to have to try to see if your worldview is compatible with that or not, and if not, you may have to go get yourself a new worldview. Might I suggest theism, and in particular, Christian theism. But then again, that's where I come from. But I came to this worldview as the result of a quest, of a search, very much like you, I'm sure. So, let's examine just for today, in the time that we have left, the plausibility of that first premise, that everything that begins to exist has a cause. You've got to ask yourself, does that premise, does that idea, does that statement, does it really make sense? If it doesn't make any sense, then we should reject it. But if it does make sense, we can hold it as true and then progress to the second premise. So, everything that begins to exist has a cause. Now, what do you think about that? Just on my initial sharing of that idea, stating that principle to you, does it seem logical? Does that premise seem plausible to you? Does it seem, as some people would say, intuitively correct to you? Does it seem believable? Does it seem like it makes sense? Most people would say yes. You might think that with this particular argument, the major objections would come against premise number 2, which is the universe began to exist. But actually, that's such a well-established fact by good philosophy and good modern science, which we'll get into in our next video, that most of the objections to this argument come against premise number 1. So again, does it seem plausible to you to be able to say the universe, everything that begins to exist has a cause? Well, I think there's a couple of ways that we can discern or determine the fact that that really does make sense. So, number 1, what would be the alternative to things not having a cause for their beginning? If it's not true that everything that begins to exist has a cause, what would be the alternative to that? Well, something could just come out of nothing. That nothingness could produce something, or nothingness could perhaps produce everything. So that's really the opposite of this premise, and so that's really what we have to ask ourselves: does that make sense? Which of those options is more plausible to believe? That everything that begins to exist has a cause, or that things can begin to exist from nothingness without a cause? Well, I would suggest, of course, that this premise is true, that everything that begins to exist does have a cause. Why? Well, because number 1, nothing can't cause something. Nothing can't cause something. I mean, just ask yourself this question. What is nothingness? Could you draw a picture of it? Could you imagine it? Could you visualize what nothingness is? And of course, the answer to all those questions is no, because then you're going to be positing something to represent no thing. If you think about it in just, a philosophical sense, no thing, nothingness, it lacks any properties, okay? Because that's what it means to exist. It means to have properties. It's called predication. You just have at least one property. But nothingness has no properties, so how could it do anything? It has no properties with which to work. Now, it doesn't have any properties. It has no abilities, no potentialities, and nothing has no substance with which to work. So, how could no thing cause something, or perhaps everything? That really just seems pretty crazy. Some folks would say, Dr. Craig says, that that's worse than magic. Well, why is that? Well, because you may not understand the connection between the magician, his hat, and pulling the rabbit out. You may not understand the mechanics of that or the causal connection, but at least there's a cause. At least there is a causal connection. You may not understand it yet. It may either be an illusion or some supernatural thing or some paranormal, cause, but at least there is a cause. The cause of the rabbit is somehow wrapped up in the magician and his hat. And so therefore to think or to posit, to imagine that something could come out of literally nothing is worse than magic. It's worse than a magic trick. And this doesn't really take rocket science. I mean, this is just something that I could ask my 4-year-old son, David. I hope you liked his rap video, by the way. If you haven't seen that, you can check it out. His video gets more views than my videos. Can't say I blame him. But even if I asked my son, David, who's almost 5, turns 5 in April, he would never agree with this, that something could just come into existence out of nothingness, with no cause, out of nothing, just come into being. So it seems pretty self-evident that that just won't work. Number two, if something can arise, if something that begins to exist can do so without a cause, just from nothingness, The second question you have to ask yourself is, well, then why don't we see this happening today? For example, if that really is a true facet of reality, then why don't we walk down the street and see purple elephants, or just normal elephants? Why don't you just be driving in your car and all of a sudden a horse is next to you? Or, you are at work and all of a sudden a new universe springs into existence right outside your office window. Why don't we see this type of thing happening? Why don't astronomers observe, for example, new galaxies just out of nothingness with no cause, no explanation at all, just popping into being from nothingness today continually in our universe? Well, I would suggest because that really just doesn't make any sense. It's actually not even metaphysically or philosophically possible that something could come from nothing. Even David Hume, who wasn't an atheist, I believe he was a deist, he actually is quoted as saying that he never believed such an absurd proposition that something could arise from nothing. Do a little Google search on David Hume and his quotes, and David Hume himself, he himself admits that he himself never even proposed such a preposterous idea that you could get something from nothingness. That just seems preposterous to David Hume as well, even though he rejected the theistic concept of a personal God. So why doesn't it happen today? So number one, nothing can't come from something. Number two, why doesn't that happen today? Number three, what about science? You see, the law of causality, that everything that begins to exist does have a cause. That's just one of many ways to formulate or to state the law of causality. If the law of causality is not true, if it's not actually a law or a fundamental description of our universe of reality, what would that mean for science? I mean, think about it. The scientific method of investigation and research and so forth, if the law of causality was thrown out, the scientific enterprise would come crashing down, because you could never really come to solid, orderly, rational, empirical conclusions on anything. It would have horrendous consequences for science, for the scientific enterprise. So, obviously, in science today, even if someone claims to be an atheistic, naturalistic scientist, he also believes in this causal principle, the law of causality, that everything that begins to exist has a cause. So even science, secular science, whatever, true, solid science is in the corner of this causal principle, this law of causality. So that's the third question. Question number 4, what about our common experience? Again, it doesn't seem that we ever witnessed this happening. In my 34 years of life, I know I don't look 34, but I've never witnessed this happening. I have, number one, never even seen nothingness, because, well, of course, it wouldn't be anything there to be seen, but I've never witnessed something or everything or anything coming into being out of nothingness. As Dr. Phil Fernandez said, I encourage you to check him out, by the way, fantastic apologist. He runs the Institute of Biblical Defense. Dr. Phil Fernandez, he's quoted as saying, nothing is nothing, therefore nothing can do nothing, therefore nothing can cause nothing. And that's just, kind of a simple formulation, but it makes sense. Nothing is nothing, therefore it can do nothing, and if it can't do anything, well, then it can't cause anything. So nothing could never cause anything, and it certainly couldn't cause everything. So what about our common experience? Our common experience, our everyday experience as we go through the world and through life and just through this reality, it militates against anything other than the truth of this law of causality. So number 1, nothing can't come from something. Number 2, why doesn't it happen today? Number 3, what about the enterprise of science? Number 4, what about our common experience? And then number 5, lastly, what about philosophy? Because you see, this is not a physical principle that we're talking about here. The law of causality, certainly we see it in operation within the physical realm and in the physical sciences, but the law of causality is not itself a physical principle. It is a metaphysical principle. It's very much like Gottfried Wilhelm Leibniz's principle of sufficient reason that we covered in our last cosmological argument, that everything that exists has an explanation for its existence. That also is a metaphysical principle. So the principle that everything that begins to exist has a cause is a metaphysical principle. Why do I say that? Well, because sometimes folks will say, and perhaps you yourself are thinking, well, the law of causality is true for everything in the universe, but it's not true of the universe itself. But you have to stop and realize the mistake you're making there. The law of causality isn't really just a physical principle, though we see it in operation in the physical realm. It is a metaphysical principle, and that means it governs all of reality, all places, at all times, at all events. It is a metaphysical principle that governs all of reality. So if that be true, then it holds true for all of reality, at all times and all places, that everything that begins to exist has a cause. It is a metaphysical principle. So if you are going to choose a worldview, a way of looking at reality that violates or that you throw out the causal principle, that's really a bankrupt worldview. That's really an irrational worldview. And that's kind of humorous because we as Christians, as theists, we are usually the ones who are accused of holding to a worldview that is bankrupt or irrational. But actually, if you come against certain arguments like this from natural theology, which point powerfully to the existence of God, but you deny these universal principles that we know are true, that actually causes your worldview to be bankrupt and irrational. If that be the case, then, my friend, I don't have enough faith, enough trust, enough confidence in that kind of a worldview to embrace it to where it would make me violate what I know to be true about reality, certain universal principles. And this is why I said what I said. It's very important to follow the evidence wherever it leads, to follow the truth to whatever conclusion it leads us to about reality. If somebody could demonstrate to me logically, inescapably, convincingly that the theistic God does not exist, that Jesus Christ is not who he says he is, and that the Christian worldview is really just implausible and incoherent, I would stop believing it, because I will not live my life, as far as I can help it, according to deception and untruth, lies, falsity. I won't. So you got to ask yourself, if your worldview is going to cause you or force you to deny this causal principle, that's going to really, it's going to turn out to be a bankrupt and an irrational worldview. So I do encourage you to ask yourself that question, what about philosophy? This is a metaphysical principle that we know to be true through philosophy about the universe, and we really just can't violate it. So philosophy, our experience, science, what we observe happening today, and just the simple fact that nothing can come from something, these all militate against denying the causal principle. All of those areas are in favor of the causal principle, and therefore in favor of premise one, that everything that begins to exist has a cause. And then, of course, the question might arise, well, what about God? What about God? If everything that begins to exist must have a cause, well, then what was the cause of God? But again, if you're thinking that, or if you hear that, that person is simply really not paying attention or reading through or thinking through premise number one. Because what does it say again? Everything that begins to exist has a cause. And by definition, ask any Muslim person, Islamic person, Jew, or Christian, God himself, he has no beginning. He is eternal. He is a necessary, uncaused cause of all that is. To ask what caused an uncaused cause is to ask why is a circle round, or to ask why a bachelor is single. It falls within the definition of God himself. If you truly understand the concept of God, and perhaps you really don't, and so you're hazy on some of those ideas, but God has no beginning. If he had a beginning, he'd be finite, he'd be a contingent being, and he wouldn't be God. He wouldn't be the necessary foundation of all of reality. So God has no cause. And certainly we don't agree that God caused himself. That's an incoherent, illogical, silly idea, because to cause yourself, how would that work? Well, I would have to exist in order to cause my own existence. Exist before I existed to cause my own existence, and surely that doesn't make any sense. So that first premise, it is true, but everything that begins to exist, God himself never began to exist. He is the uncaused cause of all that is. So after looking at the first premise like that number one, nothing can come from something. Why doesn't it continue to happen today? Things just come from nothingness. What about science? Science militates against things coming into being out of nothingness without a cause. Our experience militates against that kind of thinking. And even good philosophy is in support of this metaphysical principle that says that everything that begins to exist has a cause. So we can accept, I believe, premise number one. It's in accordance with philosophy, our experience, science, what we observe happening in the world today, and just the simple fact that nothing cannot come from something. First premise is in the bag. It's good to go. Next time we will discuss premise number two, the universe began to exist. There's two different lines of evidence for that. There's philosophical evidence for that, and there's a huge amount of modern scientific evidence that supports this neutrally religious conclusion that the universe began to exist. It may have spiritual implications or transcendent implications, but that's just really a statement about the universe itself. It's a religiously neutral statement that the universe began to exist, and come to find out from Einstein to Edwin Hubble, there's some fascinating scientific evidence that supports that. So that's what we'll do next time. We'll investigate premise number two. We'll look at the philosophical evidence and then the scientific evidence that supports the premise that the universe began to exist. Encourage you guys to check out the rest of our website. Go ahead and send me an email at jason@claycup.com. Go ahead and subscribe to the email updates, RSS feed for Intelligent Faith 315. And we'll see you guys next time. Until then, have an intelligent faith. Bye-bye.